Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and other in between transgender stuff, I guess we gotta be PC nowadays. uh, Another year has passed. The Mayan apocalypse did not happen, and therefore we now have 2013. Somewhere there is a man crying, surrounded by machine guns in a bunker because he was hoping for the zombie apocalypse. Don't worry, I'm sure the conspiracy nuts will think of a new one. But regardless, that means I have to review the year in movies. It's been, I would say, actually a very good year. And traditionally, I do a top 5, bottom 5, worst 5. And this year, I was really, really tempted to do a top 10. And we'll get into that in a little bit. I've also done something a little additional this year. I have now categories that'll be both positive and negative for the worst and best in particular fields, such as worst sequel, worst remake, most forgettable film, which I did do last year, and then, of course, worst 5, top 5, and best sequel, and, of course, best remake, a few honorable mentions, and, of course, most underappreciated film of the year. Now, before I get into the actual winners and losers, let me preface this by saying this is my opinion. I have my own taste, my own likes, my own hates, my own pet peeves that have influenced this and might not reflect your own opinions. I also have my own idea of what is good art, what can be ignored and just kind of thrown off as, well, that's film. Different levels of suspension of disbelief, shall we say, which might make some people disagree. If you do, you may post why you think a certain film was worse or better than what I thought, but, keep it civil, people. After all, we're talking about just movies of entertainment. No reason to go crazy on us. Also, keep in mind, I did not see every film that came out this year. Some that actually a lot, that probably would make a good top 10 horrible films of the year. But since I'm not getting paid to go see films, God help me, I know I would, I tend to try to see the stuff I prefer, or that looks like would appeal to me. That doesn't always pan out. But at the same time, it also means I miss a lot of good stuff. Like, I have not yet seen Jack Reacher. I've heard a lot of good things. I kind of want to see this film. Not gonna, it's not gonna be on the list because I haven't seen it, and it might be worthy of being up here. I'm hearing a lot of good things, and I might catch it at some point, but I didn't see it. If you want to know what I've seen this year, well, look at the channel. I put every time I go see a movie in theaters, I'd make a review for it, and you can find them all here on YouTube. So far, I have not issued a takedown order on anything. So, crossing my fingers. For example, The Hunger Games is another one. I still haven't seen The Hunger Games. I know I should, just for cultural context, because it's become such a big hit. It's one of those I keep every time I go to the DVD shop to look and purchase something. I wind up seeing something from the 80s. I'm like, well, I was going to buy that, but yeah, Bruno Mattei film. Oh yeah. Which, by the way, I saw. No, we're not going to distract it. This is time for the. Let's start the list. Let's starting off with the bottom of the pile. And before we get to the worst 5, let's do our special awards. Starting off with worst sequel of the year, Silent Hill Revelations. Man, this was in every way worse than the original. Not as good acting, not as good mood, not as good scares, not as good atmosphere, not as good script, not as good special effects. I mean, the movie had you kind of going, what is the rules it's following when it comes to the powers that are in this movie? What's going on? The original had a really great atmosphere and really built up its tension slowly. And that worked great. very similar to how the games worked. Silent Hill Revelations, not so much. This movie are just the only thing that it did better, I think, than the first one. And this has nothing to do with the actual movie. What it has to do with is behind the scenes writing that the original director and writer, I believe, did not think a male character would risk so much to go save his daughter or any child, really. So he had a character change to a female, which is offensive to me as a male. At least in this film, they had Sean Bean sacrificing a lot, although you could still interpret it that he was really just doing it for his wife, because his wife asked him to. Sean Bean was wasted in this movie. So was Malcolm McDowell. And it's just, in general, worse than the original, which is pretty much what it takes to make a worse sequel. Now, we'll move on to our next category, worst remake. Let's face it, remakes are generally not so good. And we've had more than our fair share this year. And to be honest, I haven't seen any really good ones. But which one takes the cake? Well, for 2012, it's Red Dawn. A movie insulting its audience by, one, trying to come up with a movie that is very much a movie of its time and trying to bring it into modern day. Here's the thing. There was an opportunity to make a modern day Red Dawn remake, but that opportunity was about from 2002 to 2005. If you wanted to do a Red Dawn where you go in an invasion USA route, where you want to show terrorism becoming a huge problem in the United States, you could have done that back then. It would have been controversial, no doubt, but it would have brought the spirit of the original Red Dawn. It would have been justified of remaking it. Oh, look, back then we were fearful of this happening, a Soviet invasion of the United States. This is our modern day fears of terrorists kind of coming in and forcing us to live under Islamic law or something like that. Yeah, controversial, but you could at least say as a remake, yeah, that's an update. That's bringing forth everything that we were afraid of in the first, back in the 80s to the modern day. Here, pretty much everything that I hate about remakes is present. The update doesn't make much sense or is necessary. Sometimes there are stories that are worthy of just retelling every so many years, like a Dracula movie. I'm never going to complain when they remake Dracula, because it's become such a classic tale. It's so right. You don't need an excuse to update it. Red Dawn, though, you kind of did. It had a particular message for a particular time. And like I said, there was a window where you could have justified the update. It's past. It's long past. And the other thing is, this is the biggest problem, and it's hard to articulate with remakes. They tend to, whoever makes these, pull off like the pop culture ideals, kind of like the light jokes people make about the movies. So the Wolverine stuff is gone a little bit more crazy. The idea of like teenagers in the woods fighting has become like really like teenage models fighting in the woods. I mean, really, they do not look like they've been roughing it at all. The original, man, when you looked at them, they looked like they had been living out in the woods, and it had become harder than guerrilla fighters. In this case, not so much. And then there was this plain. The other thing is, you write a script, and then there's memorable stuff from the original film, and you just jack that in there, even though it makes no context to your new script, i.e. the tracker plotline, which was innovative and useful in the first movie, and you could have done it today. In fact, it would make much more sense doing it today. You can easily see this technology being used. But they do it in the most idiotic fashion in this one. Ugh. So shameful. So shameful. And the characters were not very likable either, which is just right there is a big problem. And the characters are not likable because, again, they take one or two attributes from the original that were rather subtle, not overblown, and though that character is remembered for having those attributes within the film. So when they make a remake, that character is nothing but those attributes. And that's our main character, not Jeb, his brother there, who originally was Charlie Sheen. In the original, his character out of the group was the more hot-headed, aggressive of them. He wasn't overly aggressive, though, but out of that group, he was the more aggressive of them. So what do? They just make his character nothing but being aggressive and angsty. And of course, he's unlikable. Not the actor's performance per se, but just the character and how he was written. Well, I think I've gone on enough about Red Dawn, and let's face it, I've done an entire review of that. So let's move on to our next category. The most forgettable film of the year. There are some movies where, my God, you completely forget you ever saw them. And this year there was plenty. In fact, most of the top 10, well, not a good number of the top 10, or top 5, or worst 5, I should say, belong in that category. But out of all of them, which one do I really, really forget? Well, this year, it's Silent Hill Revelations. I really, honestly have forgotten I've seen that film multiple times. It's only really when I was reviewing the movies I'd seen the year, when I saw Silent Hill, I was like, really? Oh, yeah, that came out. That's another reason why it's the worst sequel. It is so forgettable that it harms it. It gives it as one of the few double entries I'm doing on this new style I have here, or these new special awards. So, most forgettable film of the year, Silent Hill Revelations, which is really hard. Normally my most forgettable film of the year is something that is like okay, and that's what makes it forgettable. Here we have a bad film that's forgettable, which makes it even worse. Okay, enough floating around the issue. It's time to get to the actual worst 5. Now, how this goes is number 1 is actually the worst. Number 5 is not as bad as number 1. So, who is in at number 5? Red Dawn. I've just talked about Red Dawn, and, among the stupidest thing is, again, the background political aspect of them changing the enemies from Chinese to North Korea, which just makes them completely unbelievable. I've explained in my review why North Korea is not a credible threat to the United States, and China, yeah, you could see the Chinese actually taking swaths of U.S. territory. It's going to be a war to fight them. But when you make it the North Koreans, everything falls apart. However, in the technical aspects, it's not as bad as some of the other movies here, which is why it's in at number 5. Number 4, The Possession. The Possession almost got most forgettable film of the year, but I still at least remembered a couple of the characters from this movie. The Possession could have had a unique aspect in that it was a Jewish possession movie, but I've seen Jewish possession movies. And therefore, this is kind of like the go-to thing now to do. Okay, the exorcism thing is kind of done. Well, we'll do it with the Jewish religion. No, that'll give something new. And it's the same ideal everyone else is using. Other than that, it's a stereotypical possession movie. Nothing new is kind of brought forward. Other than maybe going a little bit into the Orthodox Jewish community, which is, there was another one that was like this. I'm trying to remember what it was called. But, it works. But again, it's not technically a bad film. It's mostly just forgettable, which is why it's number 4. And the same thing kind of applies to number 3, The Raven. It's another film that's mostly forgettable, and the only thing that's really saving is Johnny Cusack's performance as Edgar Allan Poe. He brings a slightly more realistic performance of how Poe actually was in real life, but at the same time, it's taking liberties with the end of his life, shall we say, about his final days. and it just kind of loses. It kind of feels it's too much trying to rip off Jack the Ripper movie and the new Sherlock Holmes movies as well, leaving it rather meh. This one was a tough to decide between The Raven and The Possession, which one deserved 3, which one deserved 4. You can almost consider these two interchangeable. And the more I think about it, the more maybe I think The Possession deserves to be number 3, but on a technical level, The Possession was done better than The Raven, so The Raven's in at number 3. Number 2 should come as no surprise to anyone who's just been listening to this video, is Silent Hill Revelations. It was bad, it was really, really forgettable, and it still was forgettable even though it was bad. Normally really bad movies stick in your mind, which is what we'll have for number 1. So what got the worst film of the year? Well, if you've watched my channel at all, right now I think you've narrowed it down. Battleship. This movie really did. Sunk. No. Bad pun. Bad. I hit myself. Alright. I went for like an hour ripping into Battleship and its stupidity of trying to rip off Michael Bay without even having the dignity to be a Michael Bay film. It's sad. Battleship actually makes you appreciate the good aspects of Michael Bay. The fact that he is at least a decent cinematographer, that he can give him this action to shoot and he's pretty good. Like, let's face it, that last like third of the Transformers Dark of the Moon movie was watchable because he didn't do any of his character development BS, and some of that is even you can put more onto the writers, but Battleship was trying to do all that, which, you know, you're trying to copy a very good movie, or not a very good movie, without as much skill or budget. Well, I mean, they threw a lot of money at this, but the stupid was just all over the place on this. And poor, what's his name? Taylor Kitsch, because this is the second movie's main character he's been in, major motion picture, and it bombed, and I have a feeling it's going to hurt his career for an actor that's not really that bad. This is getting me depressed. I don't even want to talk about Battleship. I went on about some of the other films, but Battleship pisses me off so much, I don't even want to talk about it. Don't ever see Battleship. No, see Battleship, but see it in some way that's free. I didn't necessarily say download it, people, but if it's on TV, watch it once just to realize how bad it is. Unless you have something better to do. Then I won't blame you. Okay, this is pissing me off enough. Let's move on to the better stuff of the year. And there was actually a lot of good stuff this year. So let's start off with the inverse of worst sequel, the best sequel of the year. And that movie is of course, Skyfall. This is an excellent installment in the James Bond franchise. It's great. It works wonderful. It's got atmosphere. It's got Bond being Bond. You get a little bit more of an in-depth examination. And of course, Javier Bardem, I can't pronounce his name. In this movie, fantastic. One of the best Bond villains. The only weak spot that I have is it's got Hollywood hacker syndrome, which, yeah, I kind of don't buy a lot of the hacking stuff. But the movie's so good, I ignore it. You know, it allows me to suspend my suspension of disbelief, which is impressive. So that's why it gets best sequel of the year. Now, as for best remake, really none of the actual remakes I saw this year were that good. I mean, I didn't mention Total Recall. Total Recall was just bland. It wasn't, unlike a lot of people, I didn't rip into it, but it also wasn't good either. And I guess out of all the pure remakes, it's probably the best, but since Les Miserables has been made into a film before, even though it wasn't a musical, I can technically consider the new Les Mis a remake, and therefore I'm going to give the actual best remake to an actually good movie, Les Miserables, the adaptation of the Hollywood adaptation of the Broadway play of the classic novel. It's a great movie, great musical. It's an uplifting story, great characters, and like I said, one of the few movies where it is about social injustice without pointing the finger to any individual. And it does it in such a wonderful way. It encourages you, and that's kind of the purpose, really, is to encourage you to try to do better for yourself and your fellow man without just blaming somebody to do it. It works great. It is a great movie. See it. Now, before we get to the top spot, it's time to get to honorable mentions. As I said, there was a lot of really good stuff this year, and I wanted to mention these in part in order to avoid people yelling at me, "Why didn't you do this movie?" These are movies that would have probably, if I had done a top 10, would have been top 10. But since they need mention, let's throw them in. Argo. Great movie about not only the beginnings of our modern problems with the Middle East, but also with filmmaking. And it does it surprisingly well. And if you don't like it, you can Argo fuck yourself. Context joke, people. We, of course, also have Cabin in the Woods, good homage film to classic horror, and it does it in a creative way. The Amazing Spider-Man. This movie, I kind of liked the Raimi movies before this. Now this came out, it's actually making me re-examine the Raimi Spider-Man trilogy and making me think really how much of a missed opportunity that was. How much the Raimi trilogy was about more 60s Spider-Man rather than Spider-Man in a modern day, how he would be. This is a much, much better adaptation. And speaking of comic book adaptations, The Dark Knight Rises, another one that didn't get into the top 5. And again, this would have probably been in the top 10. I didn't hate the film like a lot of people do complain. I thought it was a very decent installment into the trilogy. Weakest movie out of the 3, but the same way you could say Return of the Jedi is the weakest out of the original 3 trilogy of Star Wars. It's still fine. It would have probably been a number 6 or 7 on my list. And I also love the Bane character. Well, no, I love how people make fun of the Bane character online. It's a fun character to poke fun at. And of course we have Les Mis' Skyfall, which I've just talked about, and of course The Hobbit, which another one that's a really good adaptation. But for me personally, this doesn't get into my top 5. Who knows? Some of these over time will stick with me and would probably rise up. Like for example, the Sherlock Holmes movie, the new not necessarily the sequel, Game of Shadows, but just Sherlock Holmes, the remake with Robert Downey Jr. It took me a while before I really took that on as one of my top 10 favorite movies, which I should do a video on that one day. But it took a little while for me to realize, hey, this is one of my top 10s. And before we get to this, I don't think any of these will be, well, you never know. But before I get to the top 5 this year, it's time for me to get to the most underappreciated film of the year, something which I think is very important to draw attention to. And ironically, even though I'm doing this, it's a tie this year. This is the year, I think, of this, really the studio's getting for the first time big negative box office returns. One of those with Battleship, and it's completely deserved. The other has to do and is blamed purely on the marketing. They messed up so much on the marketing. It shows the importance of a marketing campaign in modern cinema. And that, of course, is John Carter. This is a good movie. See this movie. It does not deserve the crap it gets. And this year, John Carter is sharing this honor with Dredd, another film that got overlooked and is really a great movie. One of the best action movies I've seen in a while. So both of those, you go out and you buy a legitimate copy. Show at least that this movie has, give it an afterlife, shall we say. Alright, so now that we've mentioned those two, it's time to get on to the actual top 5 of the year. Number 5 is The Raid Redemption. Yeah, this movie kicks ass. Literally, I believe there is a scene where some guy does get kicked in the ass. It is a great martial arts film. It's got a grittiness to it. There's scenes that are extremely tense, and it's as brutal as hell. And it's entertaining as hell, too. Watch this movie. It's great. It's an excellent, and I hope we see, if this is what we can expect from Indonesian cinema, I hope we see more films from Indonesia. Yeah, there was kind of a debate after. It seems like the martial arts genre has shifted now, or it seemed to be shifting south. China dominated the martial arts genre, and then I think with Tony Jaa, the Thais are trying to take over, and maybe the raid here kind of shows maybe Indonesia has a shot at kind of taking over the martial arts subgenre of films. Regardless, though, it is a good movie. Buy it, see it, do something. Number 4 is The Avengers. This is another one of those that, since I have the DVD now, I find myself watching it every now and then. It's one of those that you go and watch, and it's really enjoyable, and it's really good. I almost did this as the best sequel, since it's technically a sequel to 4 different movies. But it's also kind of its own thing. And I still think that Skyfall was the better of the sequels, even though this movie, I think, is in my top 4. I watch it, or in my top 5. I watch it so much. I enjoy it. It's entertaining. It's what we wanted. And it's amazing that it got pulled off, and you just had this satisfaction that, oh my god, they did it. They did it. I'm happy. Happier, certainly, than the punks in the next film, which I've already talked about briefly. Number 3 is Dredd, or technically Dredd 3D. It's a hard action movie. I talked about it a little bit. You should definitely buy this movie. It's got a lot of similarities with The Raid, but as I said before in my review, those people that kind of pick up on the similarities between The Raid and Dredd tend to know enough about movies to know that Dredd was in production coming out long before that. Or if they weren't aware of it, are the types of people that kind of listen to podcasts like this or other people's reviews and are aware of that, which kind of defeats the purpose of why everyone's talking about how the two are similar. Regardless, they're 2 really good action films, great characterization, and a great redo, actually. Now, and if you're wondering why Dredd wasn't considered best remake, it's because it's not a remake of the Sylvester Stallone Dredd movie. It's kind of a technicality I'm calling on that, but it really just goes back to the source material, and this is making a movie based on the source material. So it's not really remaking a previous film. It's making its own movie based on the stuff the original was based on. Alright, number 2, The Expendables 2. This was a tough one to pick between Dredd and The Expendables 2, and you can kind of almost consider them equal. I just kind of feel like putting The Expendables 2 at number 2. Maybe it's the matchup to 2s, maybe it's because Jean-Claude Van Damme does an excellent job as the villain in this. He is scary as hell. And it's just a lot of fun. It's a movie that's not being serious, knows it's having fun, and unlike a lot of films that do this nowadays and it's just annoying, this one gets away with its cheekiness. Yeah, the Chuck Norris thing was a little weird, but in a fun way. Alright, so what is my number 1 film of the year? This one's going to be controversial, but I'm putting it at Prometheus. I really like this movie. Yeah, it's got a lot of really dumb plot holes in it, but I still enjoy it, and the more I think, the other Alien and Aliens film, and specifically the first two, the ones that everyone agrees are really, really great and awesome, have stupid character moments too. And I feel a part of that stuff was due to editing. There is some mess behind the scenes, and a lot of that has to do, a lot of people's problems with this film that they complain about the most are two rather ancillary characters that don't have much to do with what the main plot is. They're basically the first two guys that get killed off in the movie. They act really, really dumb. I can kind of tell myself, well, they're just really, really dumb individuals for doing something so silly and stupid. The rest of the stuff, there's explanations within the movie for, and some of the cutscenes that have already come out do kind of explain some of the other things that people had were claiming plot holes. Like they said, no one noticed the giant tentacle monster inside the medical bay. Well, as it turns out, one of the cutscenes that they cut for pacing purposes was a Charlize Theron's character mentions that that thing is in one of the pods, so they are aware if it's in there. It's contained, so I guess they don't bother dealing with it. The other thing people complained about, of course, is Mr. Wayland and his portrayal by Guy Pearce. And that's another one, if you know the background of the movie, okay, the reason they hired Guy Pearce was because originally there was a scene where David, the android, talks to Guy Pearce in his dream, or the Wayland character, I should say, in his dream, and lo and behold, it's Wayland of his youth. So there was a scene where they needed to show the same actor younger. However, at the very last minute before filming it, they cut the scene for, again, pacing purposes. But by that point, you've had Guy Pearce ready. You did the makeup for Guy Pearce. He's in the role. He's a known actor. And it was cut so late that you kind of just went, well, we cut the scene, but we're going through with the rest of the movie. That's the reason. And once you kind of know that, you're like, oh, well, okay, I know why. And if it seems like I'm defending it, it had a lot of other really good stuff. It really is a good At the Mountains of Madness remake. It adds both answering questions while at the same time leaving a lot of mysteries. We get some sense of where the aliens come from, but not a complete sense, and it still leaves us with plenty of questions, even though it tries to answer some things. And I find it enjoyable. I like sitting down and watching this movie. It's a great film to watch along with the rest of the Aliens movies. And does it fit in context? Well, the biggest problem is you have to figure out how it fits in with the Wayland of the AVP, but I'm sure there's theories out there. Believe me, there are fans out there that are figuring out a way that everything works with all the other movies. Even Scott kind of purposely made this movie just to kind of troll the AVP sub-franchise. I mean, with the rest of the Aliens, Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, there's no real contradiction, but having Wayland does kind of interfere a bit. You can the easiest one is for people to say, well, they're two different companies that just both happen to be called Wayland. It works. But it's a fun, it's an enjoyable film. Now I hope you're all. I'm sure there's some people that are filming at the mouth out there. Others are like, oh wow, I kind of agree with this guy. Maybe, I'm hoping there are. And there are others that are like, what do you mean you didn't put The Hobbit on here? What do you mean you didn't put The Amazing Spider-Man? What do you mean you didn't put Argo? What do you mean you didn't put Jack Reacher? Hey, I didn't see Jack Reacher. So tell me what you think, and how do I think of the year overall? This was a really damn good year. As always, we kind of tend to compare the film years to 1982 because so many classics came out in 1982. And this year's pretty damn close. Only time will tell if this is another magic year where movies come out. And you know what? It might. There was plenty of underperforming movies like John Carter, which in the future can be viewed. Don't forget, 1982, Tron came out. Complete flop. 20 years later, cult classic, popular with a lot of people. inspires a lot of people. Who knows? Hopefully John Carter will take that same path. Hopefully some of these other films. I hope The Raid Redemption becomes a classic. I hope Dread becomes a classic. Expendables 2, Prometheus, The Avengers. The Avengers are already up there. Skyfall, Les Mis. Who knows? Maybe even years from now, one of the movies that I'm talking about in my bottom 5. Now, scratch that. No, there's no hope for any of those. But it's a really, really good year. Now, what do we have coming up next year? Giant robots fighting giant monsters. Thor. Actually, really interesting thing with the Thor, it's going to be the first major Marvel movie not released in the summer. They're going for the Thanksgiving window, as I like to call it, which is an interesting tactic. We'll see how it goes. And speaking of Marvel, in the summer we're not completely let go. We've got Iron Man 3. We've got a new Superman movie. We've got G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe, I'm still divided. I'm pissed off at the studio for what they're doing for remaking it. And as we get closer to that film's release, I plan on doing a video criticizing Hollywood's use of test audiences and kind of their methodology of test audiences, and just how studios are not doing it right, and how they kind of use test audiences as an excuse. And I've got things to talk about. However, the director of the movie said that they completely caught him off guard when they decided to do that. It was clearly a reaction at the top of the studio freaking out. I'm going to have to see the movie before I make a judgment, because it looks like, at least as it was originally intended, it looked like a really, really good movie. A really good action nod that was truly feeling like the good old-fashioned G.I. Joe. Hopefully, even though they made some changes, they don't ruin the overall feel. I know they brought back Duke, and I hate that. I hope that want them to hope. You know what I really want them to do? I want us to succeed, and just everyone say how much they hated Duke for living, so that they make a third film and they actually do kill him off. That's my hope. It would have been really ballsy of Channing Tatum to go, no, Duke should have died. I'm not doing it. But you could have had my respect if you'd done that. Oh well, we'll see how that movie pulls out. So I talked about Pacific Rim, and who knows what stuff is going to come out that I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting The Raid Redemption. Here it is at number 5. The Amazing Spider-Man. I would have really just been on that. I really liked that movie. Amazed it came out. Cabin in the Woods, Argo, 2 other examples of movies that were not on my radar. Saw them, liked them. And who knows what stuff is going to come out and it's crap. I kind of at first thought, Red Dawn, that might be a good one. That'll probably be a really nice one. And then I saw it. Battleship. Back in my mind was kind of hoping Battleship would be alright. Oh, it hurts to think that now. And hell, even Silent Hill Revelations I thought would be a really good adaptation, really building on the first movie. Was I wrong. So there's still plenty to see. But, alas, I've got some more movies. We've got more movies coming up. In fact, I should be this weekend seeing Zero Dark 30, which I'm going to count, I guess, as a 2013 film because it wasn't released here. It's kind of weird. Sometimes we get the special releases here, and sometimes we don't. Because we're kind of big enough to get some stuff. Like, we got The Raid, and we get other stuff that's kind of limited release here in Tom's River, but what you gonna do? Anyway, so stay tuned for that, and keep on watching. Subscribe, like, share, and provide feedback, please. And if you have your own personal top 10, feel free to share your personal top 10, top 5, top 25. I don't think they're gonna let you do a top 100 on YouTube comments. Or go out and make your own video. Hey, if I can do it, literally almost anyone can. So signing off for 2012, even though I'm recording this in 2013 and posting it in 2013. 2012 is now officially signed off. Hello, lucky number 13. Catch you guys in the cinemas. Signing off.